On Joe Biden has just released a statement. Was released on Medium, and he talks about some other things before he gets to the heart of the allegations against him. And he says this: "I want to address allegations by a former staffer that I engaged in misconduct 27 years ago. They aren't true. This never happened. While the details of these allegations of sexual harassment and sexual assault are complicated, two things are not complicated. One is that women deserve to be treated with dignity and respect, and when they step forward, they should be heard, not silenced. The second is their stories should be subject to appropriate inquiry and scrutiny. Responsible news organizations should examine and evaluate the full and growing record of inconsistencies in her story, which has changed repeatedly in both small and big ways. But this much bears emphasizing. She has said she raised some of these issues with her supervisors and senior staffers from my office at the time. They, both men and women, have said unequivocally that she never came to them and complained or raised issues. News organizations that have talked with literally dozens of my former staffers have not found one, not one, who corroborated her allegations in any way. Indeed, many of them spoke to the culture of an office that would not have tolerated harassment in any way, as indeed I would not have. There is a clear, critical part of this story that can be verified. The former staffer has said she filed a complaint in 1993, but she does not have a record of this alleged complaint. The papers from my Senate years that I donated to the University of Delaware do not contain personnel files. It is the practice of senators to establish a library of personal papers that document their public record, speeches, policy proposals, positions taken, and the writing of bills. There's only one place a complaint of this kind could be: the National Archives. The National Archives is where the records are kept at what is called the Office of Fair Employment Practices. I am requesting that the Secretary of the Senate ask the archives to identify any record of the complaint she alleges as filed and make available to the press any such document. Oh, wow. If there was ever any such complaint, the record will be there. As a presidential candidate, I'm accountable to the American people. We have lived long enough with a president who doesn't think, and then he goes on, talks about Donald Trump, then he talks about his own career. Willie, thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.